The clock struck midnight as I drove home on this deserted road, the only company being the hum of my car engine. The night was as black as ink, the darkness only broken by the ghostly glow from my headlights. The road stretched out before me, a lonely serpent slithering through the desolate landscape. There was an eerie stillness in the air, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Suddenly, an unexpected sight caught my eye. Flashing lights danced in my rearview mirror like an ominous disco in the abyss. I wasn't expecting company on this solitary road. The piercing lights seemed to appear out of nowhere, slicing through the thick cloak of the night. An unsettling feeling began to creep over me, a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Something wasn't right. As I pulled over, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. In my rearview mirror, a beat-up old sedan took shape instead of the expected police car. The vehicle was a relic from another era, its rusted body gleaming dimly in the glow of its own headlights. Behind the wheel, a shadowy figure sat, their face obscured by the darkness. The figure began to flash his headlights at me, a Morse code of urgency that filled the night with an eerie, pulsating light. My heart skipped a beat. Was this an undercover officer or something else entirely? I decided to engage, rolling down my window, the cool night air rushing in and carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The stranger didn't flash a badge or offer reassurances. Instead, his voice rolled out of the sedan, harsh and demanding. He ordered me to step out of the car. His words, unaccompanied by any explanation or authority, sent a chill down my spine. My instincts told me this man was no officer. I challenged him, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Are you a cop?" I asked. But he ignored my question, his voice rising with impatience as he repeated his command. The tension escalated. Each shout from the stranger was like a jab of fear, puncturing the calm of the night. I felt a knot of dread forming in my stomach, a silent alarm bell ringing louder and louder. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed my foot onto the accelerator, leaving the stranger in a cloud of dust. The night around me became a blur as I hurtled down the deserted road. The only sounds were the roaring engine and the frantic pounding of my heart. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the stranger's beat-up old sedan tailing me. But there was nothing. Just the faint glow of his headlights fading into the distance. A wave of relief washed over me, but it didn't last. The fear and the confusion were still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Who was this man? Why did he want me to get out of my car? Was he really a cop? Or was he something else entirely? I shook off the questions, focusing on the road ahead. There was one thing I knew for sure. I had to report this. I had to let someone know what had happened. I pulled into the parking lot of the nearest police station, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked into the station. Days later, the memory of that encounter still sent chills down my spine. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease, the nagging sensation of a puzzle unsolved, an unsettling loose end. It was like an itch I couldn't reach, so I decided to do something about it. I needed answers, and the only way I could get them was by retracing my steps back to the incident's location. As I drove down the same dark road, a sense of dread filled the air, a palpable tension that seemed to thicken with each passing mile. There was an eerie familiarity to it, like a half-remembered nightmare, but this was no dream, this was reality, and I was about to uncover a truth far scarier than any nightmare. To my surprise, I found a hidden road, almost invisible in the cloak of darkness, a path I hadn't noticed the first time. The road was narrow, overgrown with vegetation, as though it hadn't been used for a long time. It led to an abandoned building, a structure that seemed to sag under the weight of its own secrets. A chill ran down my spine as I entered the building. The air was thick with dust and decay, but what I found inside was far more disturbing. Scattered across the floor were police uniforms, tarnished badges, and equipment that looked eerily official. My heart pounded in my chest as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The game console hummed in the quiet house, the only sign of life in the otherwise silent night. The comforting glow of the screen cast long shadows against the walls, as the digital world within it came alive. It was a scene of typical tranquility, a moment of shared camaraderie between two brothers. In the heart of this peaceful scene sat my brother and I, each one of us lost in the rhythm of our favorite game. Our parents were out for dinner, leaving us to our own devices, a rare moment of freedom we relished. The house was ours, a kingdom in which we ruled, our loyal game console our court jester, offering endless entertainment. The night was as still as the calm before a storm, and we were blissfully unaware of the gathering clouds. Engrossed in our virtual battlegrounds, we were soldiers charging into the fray, oblivious to the real world. The only sounds were the occasional click of the controller and the soft hum of the game console. And then, it happened. The peace of the night was shattered by a loud knock on the door. It echoed through the house, a sudden and jarring noise that seemed to hang in the air, long after it had ceased. We exchanged puzzled glances, the unspoken question hanging between us. Who could it be at this late hour? My brother, the elder and the braver of us two, rose from his seat, his curiosity piqued. I remained rooted to mine, my attention divided between the paused game and the unfolding mystery. A part of me, the part that thrived on the thrill of the unknown, was intrigued. But then, as I heard my brother's surprised exclamation from the doorway, a sense of unease began to creep in. I left the game mid-battle, my virtual avatar forgotten as I rushed to join him. That knock, loud, insistent, and way past visiting hours, was the first sign that this was no ordinary night. Little did we know the real game was only beginning. The door creaked open to reveal a figure that seemed to be a cop, at least at first glance. Dressed in what appeared to be a uniform, his presence was imposing. Yet something about him didn't quite add up. His outfit looked a little too shiny, like it had been hastily purchased from a costume shop. And his badge, well, it looked as if it were made from plastic rather than the usual sturdy metal. The man claimed he was there due to a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, performing routine checks to ensure the safety of residents. It was a plausible explanation, but the circumstances were far from ordinary. This was late at night, way past the time you'd expect a courtesy call from the local police. Despite the mounting unease, we found ourselves caught in the grip of politeness, hesitation, and a certain degree of fear. After all, it's not every day you find yourself face to face with a dubious law enforcement officer on your doorstep. He was insistent, almost too eager to step inside to take a look around to make sure everything was in order. And so, against our better judgment, we let him in. Once inside, his behavior became even more peculiar. He began rummaging through our belongings, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something specific. His actions were intrusive, far removed from what we'd expect from a supposed safety check. It was becoming increasingly clear that this man was no officer of the law. He was an imposter, a charlatan dressed up in a cheap uniform, using the guise of authority to gain access to our home. As the door closed behind him, a chill ran down my spine. Something was seriously wrong. This was no ordinary night, and this was definitely no ordinary cop. It was a realization that filled us with dread, and it was just the beginning of a night we would never forget. As the fake cop rummaged through our stuff, realization dawned on me. We had let a wolf in sheep's clothing into our home. The chilling truth struck me like a bolt of lightning, sending a cold shiver down my spine. This man, this imposter, was no officer of the law. His cheap uniform, his plastic badge, they were all just props in a terrifying charade. Fear gnawed at my insides, a relentless beast demanding attention, but I couldn't afford to panic. Not now. We were in danger, real danger, and I had to keep my wits about me. My mind raced through countless possibilities, each one more horrifying than the last. Yet, amidst the whirling chaos of my thoughts, a plan began to take shape. My brother, bless him, was keeping the fake cop occupied, his innocent chatter a clever distraction. Meanwhile, I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the 3 numbers that promised salvation. 911. As the call connected, I whispered urgently into the phone, explaining our predicament in hushed, frantic tones. The imposter carried on, oblivious to the real danger he was in. He continued to rifle through our things, his actions growing more desperate by the minute. Each second that passed felt like an eternity, the ticking of the clock a cruel reminder of our precarious situation. But then, faintly at first, I heard it. The distant wail of sirens. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, each beat echoing the growing intensity of the sirens. With every passing second they grew louder, closer, the sound cutting through the night like a beacon of hope. Fear and relief waged a battle within me, each emotion vying for dominance. Would the real cops arrive in time? Or would the wolf realize he'd been found out? I held my breath, waiting, praying for the sirens to reach us before it was too late. My heart pounded in my chest as the distant sound of sirens grew louder. The real cops were on their way. With a sudden crash, the front door burst open, revealing the true bearers of law and order. The room filled with a sudden rush of adrenaline as the real officers stormed in, their badges glistening under the harsh glare of our porch light. The fake cop froze, his eyes wide with terror as he was swiftly apprehended by the police. The tension in the air was palpable, a stark contrast to the calm of our previous gaming session. In a whirlwind of action, the thief was disarmed, handcuffed, and read his rights. It was a spectacle of justice that left us both breathless. The relief that washed over us was indescribable, a buoyant wave that lifted the heavy weight of fear from our hearts. Yet, even as the imposter was led away, his malicious gaze lingered, leaving a chilling reminder of the danger we had narrowly escaped. As the thief was led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end, or just the beginning of a nightmare?
Ever have a feeling that something's not quite right? That's how it all started on a quiet late-night drive. The allure of solitude was intoxicating, and the empty streets were my personal concert hall, my music reverberating off the silent buildings. As I was cruising down the street, my peaceful solitude was interrupted. A figure stood in the middle of the road, an unexpected apparition. As I approached, the figure came into focus, a man donned in a police uniform. An officer of the law, yes, but not your ordinary Joe Friday. There was something about him that sent a shiver down my spine, an uneasy feeling that I couldn't quite shake off. He lifted his hand, signaling me to halt, and like the well-mannered citizen I consider myself to be, I complied. I pulled over, the gravel crunching under my tires. The closer he got, the more the unsettling feeling grew. My stomach churned, as if trying to signal something was amiss. The unfamiliar cop leaned towards my car window, his face partially hidden in the shadows. He began to question me, his voice as cold as the night air, asking about my destination and the reason for my nocturnal journey. His intrusive queries felt like an invasion, and I wanted to tell him it was none of his concern. But before I could gather my thoughts, he asked me to follow him to the station for a supposed inspection. Alarm bells began to ring in my mind. It was an odd request, one that didn't quite add up. Regardless, I decided to play along, hoping it was just a routine check. As I followed him, driving further into the unknown, I couldn't help but feel a sense of doom creeping in. We drove for what felt like an eternity, but never once did a police station come into view. Instead, we ended up in an isolated, desolate area, far removed from any signs of civilization. A realization washed over me. I'd walked right into a trap. This man, this cop, was nothing but an imposter. Something about this guy set off alarm bells in my head, but I brushed it off. After all, he was just a cop, right? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmarish encounter. But then, the questions started, and they didn't seem right. This so-called cop, standing in the dim glow of the streetlight, began his interrogation. His questions seemed personal, intrusive. "Where are you headed at this hour?" he asked, a suspicious glint in his eyes. "What brings you out on these lonely streets so late?" His tone was more accusatory than concerned, setting off warning signals in my mind. We drove and drove, but there was no police station in sight. The neon glow of city lights was slowly replaced by the eerie darkness of the night, punctuated by the occasional flickering of distant stars. The concrete jungle I was so familiar with morphed into a desolate, barren landscape. The buildings, the streets, the noise, all were replaced by a spine-chilling silence that seemed to echo through the car. The asphalt began to crumble into gravel beneath the car's tires, the sound gritting against my ears. The air turned from the smoky city smell to a damp, earthy scent, the kind that fills your nostrils right before a thunderstorm. I could almost taste the unease in the air, a sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. The cop had ceased his chatter, his eyes focused on the road ahead, the shadows from the dashboard casting a macabre mask on his face. He seemed to be in his element, comfortable in the ominous environment we now found ourselves in. The only sound was the drone of the car engine and the occasional crunch of gravel. As we ventured deeper into the isolation, the realization seeped into me, cold and terrifying as the wilderness around us. This man was no officer of the law. The uniform, the badge, they were all just props in an elaborate charade. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, the rhythm of fear that echoed in my ears drowning out all other sounds. We came to a halt in an area so desolate it was as if the world had forgotten it. The car's headlights illuminated a dilapidated structure in the distance, the only sign of human interference in this forgotten slice of the world. The cop turned to me then, a dark glint in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. And that's when it hit me. This dude was no cop. He was a fake, a fraud, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I, being the naive sheep, had followed him right into his den. I've never felt fear like that before, but I knew I had to act fast. A chill ran down my spine as the imposter's malicious grin stretched across his face. This wasn't a routine check. This wasn't a lost soul in the middle of the road. This was a trap, a spider's web, and I was the unsuspecting fly. The eerie silence of the desolate area was shattered by the pounding of my heart. I had to escape. Now. My mind raced, my adrenaline surged. I broke free from his grasp, my survival instincts kicking in. Every ounce of energy, every fiber of my being was focused on one thing: escape. The ground beneath me blurred as I sprinted towards my car, my sanctuary. My breath was ragged, my legs ached, but fear was a great motivator. I didn't look back. I just kept running, praying that I'd make it out alive. But as I reached my car, I realized it wasn't over yet.